As I began last week and mentioning, beginning in the season of Lent and throughout the season of Holy Lent, I will begin offering this Tuesday morning Mass at 7:30 here at Holy Martyrs in the posture of Ad Orientem. And I'm continuing on my four-part catechetical series on the posture of Ad Orientem. And as I mentioned last week, what I mentioned in this homily will be once again printed in the bulletin for this coming weekend. Looking at the history of the posture of Ad Orientem, from the earliest days of Christianity, priests and people have celebrated the holy sacrifice of the Mass facing toward together the Lord or toward the east. It's only been in the last 40 years or so that Mass facing the people or versus populum has become the norm. The Second Vatican Council proposed Mass facing the people as an option, but it became standard in almost every parish and church around the globe. Now, after 40 years of theological reflection, many cardinals and bishops and priests are thinking more about this practice. Praying with everyone facing the same direction has an extremely long history. Facing a sacred direction features prominently in many religions. Muslims pray facing Mecca, and Jews often turn toward Jerusalem. The first Christians expected the glorious return of Christ to occur at the Mount of Olives, from where he ascended to his Father. Thus, these early Christians often turned toward the Mount of Olives during prayer. The custom later evolved into facing Jerusalem during prayer, and as the church spread through the Mediterranean world, there further developed the connection between the light of the rising sun and the glory of the returning sun. The Messiah coming from the east is rooted in sacred scripture numerously. Wisdom 16:28, Zechariah 14:4, Matthew 24:27, Luke 1:78, and Revelation 7:2. And the early church emphasized it. In the 2nd century, St. Clement of Alexandria wrote, "In correspondence with the manner of the sun's rising, prayers are made toward the sunrise in the east." It's precisely for these reasons that the building of Christian churches, when it began on a large scale in the 4th century, remember that Christianity was legalized in the year 313, they have been oriented to the east whenever possible, just as Mary Magdalene Church is. As a matter of fact, it was Chris that pointed out to me in the sacristy last week that actually our own Holy Martyrs Church here is just about east. I think it's a couple degrees off, but I mean, it's very, very, very close as far as where the altar is facing. Even when the orientation of the church enabled the celebrant to pray facing the people when the priest was at the altar, the whole congregation turned together with him. They all turned toward the east. When the priest and the people face the same way, as I mentioned last week, the priest does not have his back to the people. Rather, the priest and the people, by their common orientation, are turning toward the Lord together. Now, what about the Last Supper? The theological scholar Louis Boyer had this to say: "In no meal of the early Christian era did the president of the banqueting assembly ever face the other participants. They were all sitting or reclining on a convex side of a C-shaped table, or of a table having approximately the shape of a horseshoe. The other side was always left empty for the service. Nowhere in Christian antiquity could have arisen the idea of having to face the people to preside at a meal. The communal character of a meal was emphasized just by the opposite disposition, the fact that all the participants were on the same side of the table." He writes this in Liturgy and Architecture. We remember from the book of the prophet Ezekiel in chapter 43, Then he led me to the gate which faces east, and there I saw the glory of Israel coming from the east. I heard a sound like the roaring of many waters, and the earth shone with his glory. I fell prone as the glory of the Lord entered the temple by way of the gate which faces the east. Joseph Ratzinger, former Pope Benedict XVI, once wrote, "Despite all the variations in practice that have taken place so far in the second millennium, one thing has remained clear for the whole of Christendom. Praying toward the east is a tradition that goes back to the beginning. Moreover, it is a fundamental expression of Christian synthesis of cosmos and history, of being rooted in the once-for-all events of salvation history while going out to meet the Lord who is to come again." Next week, I will address whether or not the church still permits this posture.